The photograph arrived at the Virginia Museum of History inside a cedar box, wrapped in silk that had turned yellow with age. Dr. Sarah Chen, the museum's lead curator for Civil War collections, lifted it gently from its protective case. The daguerreotype was in surprisingly good condition. Its silver surface still caught the light even after more than 150 years. 5 people looked back at her from the year 1860. It was a wealthy white family, clearly well off, based on their fine clothes and the detailed studio backdrop. The father sat in the center, a serious man in his 50s with a heavy beard and a dark suit. His wife stood beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder, wearing an elaborate dress made of silk and lace. 3 young men, likely their sons, completed the scene. 2 stood behind their parents, and 1 sat to the father's left. Sarah had studied thousands of antebellum photographs in her career. This image followed all the usual rules: stiff poses, unsmiling faces, and bodies arranged to show family order and respectability. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "The Harrison Family, Richmond, Virginia, March 1860. March 1860 made Sarah shiver. The photograph had been taken just 1 year before the Civil War began, in what would soon become the capital of the Confederacy. Richmond was a major center of the slave trade, a city where great wealth came from buying and selling human lives. She placed the daguerreotype on her work table and adjusted the magnifying lamp. The donor's note explained that the photo came from an estate sale and was part of a collection owned by descendants who had moved north many years earlier. No other details were included. Sarah began her usual examination, recording clues that could help place the image in its historical setting. The father's clothing suggested solid merchant wealth, costly but not noble. The mother's jewelry was elegant and valuable. The sons, who looked to be between 18 and 30, wore matching dark suits that suggested unity and success. Then Sarah noticed the hands. In formal Victorian photos, hand placement was carefully planned. Hands rested on chairs, folded together, or hung naturally at the sides. But something about these hands felt wrong. Sarah leaned closer and increased the magnification. The father's right hand, resting on the arm of his chair, showed an unusual position. His index and middle fingers were crossed, and his thumb pointed outward. The mother's hand on his shoulder showed a similar strange sign. Each of the 3 sons held their hands differently, yet all appeared deliberately posed in ways that broke normal photographic rules. Sarah's pulse quickened. She had seen hand signs like these before, not in photographs but in old documents about secret communication systems. She reached for her phone and opened her research files, scrolling through images of abolitionist signals and Underground Railroad codes. Her hands shook as she compared the photograph to her references. The father's crossed fingers were a known abolitionist sign, meaning safe passage. The mother's gesture, with thumb and pinky extended while the other fingers curled, meant shelter was available. Each son's hand position matched other coded messages used in Underground Railroad communications. None of this seemed possible. Richmond in 1860 was deep in slave territory. Open support for abolition there could get someone killed. Why would a rich white family in the Confederate capital pose for a photograph using secret Underground Railroad signals? Sarah checked the donor information again. The estate sale had taken place in Philadelphia. The photos were found in the attic of a home once owned by Harrison descendants. She found a phone number and called right away. An elderly woman answered. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson, this is Dr. Sarah Chen from the Virginia Museum of History. I'm calling about the photographs your family donated, especially the Harrison family portrait from 1860. "Oh yes," Mrs. Patterson said. "My great-great-grandfather's family. I'm afraid I don't know much about them. They left Virginia during the war and never returned." "Do you know why they left?" Sarah asked. There was a pause. "Family stories say they were no longer welcome in Richmond," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Something about their beliefs being unpopular, but no one ever explained it. My grandmother said there were things about the family that were better left buried." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. "Mrs. Patterson, did anyone ever mention Underground Railroad activity in your family?" This time the silence lasted longer. Finally, Mrs. Patterson spoke softly. "How did you know?" "The photograph," Sarah said. "Their hands. Each person is making coded signs used by abolitionists. This wasn't just a family portrait. It was a message. Mrs. Patterson caught her breath. My grandmother once told me, when she was very old, that our ancestors were conductors. I thought she meant railroad workers, but she said they guided souls to freedom, and it cost them everything. I never understood. Sarah explained what she had found, describing each hand signal and its meaning. As she spoke, she could hear Mrs. Patterson quietly crying. All my life, the woman said, I believed we came from Confederate supporters. I carried shame about my Virginia roots, thinking my family was on the wrong side of history. And now you're saying they were heroes. If this is correct, then yes, Sarah replied carefully. But it needs proof. Are there any other family records? Sarah asked. Letters, diaries, business papers? There's a trunk, Mrs. Patterson said. It's in my basement, full of old documents I've never touched. My mother said they were too fragile and told me to leave them alone. Could those help? They could be very important, Sarah said. May I examine them? 2 days later, Sarah stood in the basement of Mrs. Patterson's quiet Philadelphia home, staring at a leather-bound trunk that hadn't been opened in decades. Mrs. Patterson stood nearby, her aged hands clasped nervously. I haven't opened it since I was a child, she said. My mother caught me once and became very upset. She said the past should stay buried, that some family secrets were too dangerous to uncover. I never understood why. Sarah carefully lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of papers, letters tied with ribbon, ledgers, journals, and loose documents. She gently removed the first bundle, knowing the paper could crumble if mishandled. The top letter was dated April 1859 and written in neat, elegant handwriting. Sarah read aloud, My dearest brother, I write to inform you that our mutual friend's merchandise arrived safely. 23 pieces in total, all in good condition despite the difficult journey. They are temporarily housed and will continue north as planned. Please advise when the next shipment is expected. Mrs. Patterson leaned closer. Merchandise? What does that mean? It's code, Sarah explained. Underground Railroad workers used business terms to hide their actions. Merchandise or packages meant escaped slaves. Housed meant hidden in safe locations. This letter describes the safe movement of 23 escaped slaves through Richmond. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened. Through Richmond? But that was the center of slave territory. Exactly, Sarah said. That's what made it so clever. No one would suspect a wealthy merchant family in the Confederate capital of running an underground railroad station. Sarah continued reading. Letter after letter described rescue missions, safe houses, and coordination with other conductors. One letter from October 1859 was clearer than the rest. Father grows more worried about being discovered. Neighbors question why our warehouse receives deliveries at strange hours. Thomas suggests reducing our work, but Mother insists we cannot abandon our principles simply because the danger has increased. She says each soul we save is worth whatever price we must pay. Sarah looked up. Thomas Wool. D be one of the sons in the photograph? Yes, Mrs. Patterson said. Thomas Harrison was my great-great-grandfather. He moved to Philadelphia in 1861 and never returned to Virginia. The family said he had a falling out with his parents, but no one ever explained it. Sarah next opened a journal with a cracked leather cover. The first entry was dated January 1858, written in the same hand as the photo label, likely the father's. Sarah read the opening words. I have decided to keep this record, though I know how dangerous it is. If discovered, it could destroy my entire family. Still, I believe history should know what we tried to do, whether we succeed or fail. There are 5 of us, myself, my beloved wife Catherine, and our 3 sons. We have given ourselves to a cause that makes us traitors to our neighbors and criminals under the law. We will use our textile business as cover to move escaped slaves through Richmond and onward to freedom. Sarah spent the next 6 hours carefully recording the journal entries. Her fingers ached as she typed, copying the father's detailed accounts. The Harrison family's operation was highly organized, incredibly brave, and terrifyingly dangerous. The father, whose name was later revealed as Robert Harrison, owned a textile import business with warehouses near the docks of Richmond. He received fabric shipments from northern states and sold them across Virginia. This business became the perfect cover. Large wagons arrived and left at all hours. Warehouses contained unused spaces, and regular travel routes linked Richmond to other cities. At first, Robert was not an abolitionist. His journal showed a slow change that began in 1856. He witnessed a slave auction that deeply disturbed him. I watched a mother ripped away from her children, sold to different owners who pulled them apart while she screamed. Her pain was unbearable, or rather painfully human. In that moment I realized that what we call property are people who feel and suffer just as deeply as my own family. I went home and could not look my wife in the eyes. How could I call myself a moral man while gaining from a system built on such cruelty? Catherine Harrison, his wife, clearly shared his disgust. Together they reached out to Quaker abolitionists in Philadelphia, who then connected them to the Underground Railroad network. The biggest problem was planning. Richmond sat deep inside slave territory, far from free states. Moving escaped slaves through the city required careful planning, secrecy, and misdirection. Robert's journal explained how they altered their warehouse, building false walls and hidden spaces inside shipping crates. Escaped slaves were secretly brought into Richmond from nearby plantations, hidden in the warehouse for several days, and then sent north inside fabric shipments. These shipments went to trusted business partners in Pennsylvania, who were also part of the network. "Our 3 sons have each accepted specific duties," Robert wrote in March 1858. "Thomas, our eldest at 28, oversees warehouse operations and communicates with our northern contacts. He has shown great calm under pressure. James, 24, acts as lookout and messenger, moving through the city and collecting information about slave catchers and suspicious officials. And William, only 19, has taken the most dangerous role. He travels to plantations, pretending to be a fabric buyer, making contact with enslaved people and helping plan their escape." Sarah stopped reading for a moment, stunned by the level of danger. William was younger than most of her graduate students. He traveled alone into plantations where slave owners had total control, arranging escapes that could lead to his execution if discovered. She then found a later entry from June 1859 that chilled her. William returned from a buying trip with bruises and a split lip. A plantation overseer questioned him and suspected his true intentions. William barely maintained his cover. "Tonight he told me he believes he is being watched. I advised him to stop for now, but he refused. Every week I wait," he said, "is another week those people remain in chains. I will not stop out of fear." Mrs. Patterson, reading beside Sarah, wiped tears from her eyes. They were so young, barely more than boys, and they were risking everything. Sarah continued reading, looking for any reference to the photograph that had begun the entire investigation. She found it in an entry dated February 1860. "Catherine has proposed a bold and frightening idea. She believes we should commission a family portrait, something we have avoided until now, fearing any permanent image of our faces. But she argues we need a way to identify ourselves to fellow conductors and supporters without speaking openly. She suggests we include our hand signals directly in the photograph. Anyone who understands the code will know us instantly as allies. To others, we will appear to be just another wealthy Richmond family." The next entry from March 1860 described the photog. Raffi session itself. "Today we visited J. Morrison's studio to sit for our portrait. The photographer found our hand positions strange and tried several times to correct them, but I insisted they remain as arranged. Catherine placed her hand on my shoulder in the shelter sign. I held my fingers in the safe passage signal. Thomas marked the northbound route, James indicated supplies available, and William's gesture signified multiple stations. The photographer eventually gave up, though he complained about the unusual pose. Sarah leaned back, finally seeing the full truth. The photograph was not simply a family portrait, it was an identification card, a silent credential that proved the Harrison family's loyalty to the cause to anyone who knew the codes. They could show it to potential allies without saying a word, letting the hand signals speak for them. But there was something more in Robert's writing, a sense of final purpose. Sarah turned to a later entry from the same month. "I have ordered 5 copies of the photograph, though the cost is high. Catherine understands my reason without explanation. If we are discovered, when we are discovered, for I do not fool myself into thinking we can continue forever, this photograph will be our legacy, proof that we lived, that we resisted, that we chose principle over safety. Future generations should know that not all white Southerners accepted the evil of slavery. Mrs. Patterson's voice shook. He knew they would be caught. He believed it was only a matter of time, Sarah said. Working in Richmond for so long, the danger was always growing. She flipped ahead, searching for entries from 1861, but found something strange. G.E. The journal ended suddenly in December 1860. The final entry was dated December 20th, 1860, the day South Carolina left the Union. War is coming. We feel it everywhere, heavy as smoke. South Carolina has left the Union, and Virginia will surely follow. Our work has become far more dangerous. Soon we will not just be breaking the law, but opposing a new nation. Catherine and I discussed shutting down our network. But how can we abandon people to slavery when their need is greatest? We have agreed to continue as long as we are able. May God give us strength for what lies ahead. After that, nothing, no more entries. Sarah turned the blank pages slowly. Robert had stopped writing. What happened to them? Mrs. Patterson asked. Why did the journal end? Sarah returned to the trunk, searching through the remaining items. She found business records, receipts and letters, but nothing personal after December 1860. Then, at the very bottom, she uncovered a small wooden box. Inside were letters unlike the earlier business papers. These were personal and emotional, written in different hands. Sarah recognized Catherine Harrison's graceful writing on several of them. She opened the first letter, dated January 1861. My dearest sister in Philadelphia, I write with news both hopeful and frightening. Our network has guided 42 souls to freedom this month alone. As war draws closer, desperation grows, and more attempt escape, fearing it will soon become impossible. But Robert is worn down by worry. He barely sleeps. Yesterday at dawn I found him standing at the warehouse window, staring into the street. He believes we are being watched. Sarah opened the next letter. Dat. Ed. March 1861. Virginia had seceded. Richmond was now the capital of the Confederate States. Neighbors who had once only seemed suspicious were now openly hostile. Someone had painted the word traitor on the warehouse wall during the night. Robert wanted to send the boys north for safety, but Thomas refused to leave. He said, "If we abandon our work now, when people need us most, then everything we risked means nothing." My heart breaks with pride and fear at the same time. Another letter, dated July 1861, was difficult to read. The ink was smeared in places, as if water or tears had fallen onto the page. They know. I do not know how, but they know. Men came to the house yesterday, demanded to search the warehouse. Robert walked them through calmly, while my heart pounded so loudly I feared they would hear it. We had 3 people hidden inside the false wall compartment. The men searched for 2 hours. They found nothing, but they promised to return. Robert says we must leave at once. We must move everyone tonight and shut everything down. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the next letter. It was dated August 1861 and written in Thomas's handwriting, addressed to relatives in Philadelphia. I write with terrible news. Father has been arrested for helping escaped slaves. Mother tried to stop them and was also taken away. James, William, and I barely escaped. We are heading north tonight with the last group we were hiding, 17 souls in total. We can never return to Richmond. Everything we built is gone. Mrs. Patterson gasped. They were arrested, both of them. Sarah nodded and continued reading Thomas's letter. The trial, if it can even be called that, lasted less than 1 day. Father and mother were convicted of treason against the Confederacy. Father was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. Mother received 10 years. The judge claimed the sentences were light only because father had once been respected in the community. They were given 48 hours to settle their affairs before being sent to prison. The next document was official paperwork, conviction records for Robert and Catherine Harrison, dated August 15, 1861. The charges were clearly listed: aiding escaped slaves, conspiracy against the Confederate States, and operating an illegal network. The evidence included testimony from neighbors, records of suspicious warehouse activity, and statements from captured escaped slaves who had been forced to name those who helped them. Sarah found one more letter in the box. This one was written in Catherine's hand from prison in September 1861. My beloved sons, by the time you read this, your father and I will be serving our sentences. Do not mourn for us. We made our choice knowing the risks. We have no regrets. Every person we helped reach freedom was worth whatever price we now pay. You must live forward, not backward. Build families. Seek joy. Never feel shame for what we did. We loved you enough to risk everything for what we believed was right. We hope one day you will understand. The letter continued. I have one request. Keep the photograph. Show it to your children and grandchildren. Tell them that ordinary people, merchants, mothers and sons, can stand against great evil. Tell them we chose courage over comfort and principle over profit. And tell them that even in the darkest moments of history, here were always people who lit small candles of resistance. Sarah knew she had to learn what happened to Robert and Catherine after their conviction. She contacted the Library of Virginia archives and requested prison records from Confederate facilities used during the Civil War. 3 days later, she received scanned documents from Castle Thunder, a notorious Confederate prison in Richmond where political prisoners and accused traitors had been held. Among thousands of entries, she found one that read, Robert Harrison, admitted August 17, 1861, prisoner number 347. Convicted traitor, sentence 15 years hard labor. Medical notes showed his health slowly failing during the war. Malnutrition, exhaustion, repeated illness. Then a final entry dated March 1863. Prisoner number 347, deceased. Cause of death, pneumonia worsened by malnutrition and harsh conditions. Body released to family. Another record followed. Catherine Harrison, admitted August 17, 1861. Prisoner number 428. Convicted traitor. Sentence, 10 years hard labor. Her medical records showed the same steady decline, but she lived longer. The final entry came in April 1865, only days after the war ended. Prisoner number 428 released following Confederate surrender. Physical condition poor. Transported to Philadelphia by family members. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. Robert had died in prison, never living to see the Union victory or the end of slavery. Catherine survived, but only because the Confederacy collapsed. Sarah called Mrs. Patterson immediately. I found the prison records. Your great-great-great-grandfather died in Castle Thunder in 1863. Catherine survived but was imprisoned until the war ended. The elderly woman was quiet for a long moment. Did Catherine recover? She finally asked. I don't know yet, Sarah said softly. The records only say she was taken to Philadelphia. Let me search death records from after 1865. Sarah spent several more hours searching through databases. Finally, she found Catherine Harrison's death certificate. December 1866, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Cause of death, complications from imprisonment and general weakness. Catherine had lived only 18 months after her release, her health destroyed by 4 years of hard labor and brutal conditions. But Sarah found something else as well. Catherine's obituary appeared in a Philadelphia abolitionist newspaper. It was longer than most obituaries and clearly written by someone who knew her story well. Catherine Harrison, formerly of Richmond, Virginia, passed into rest on December 14th. Mrs. Harrison was a heroine of the Underground Railroad, operating a station within the Confederate capital at great personal risk. She and her husband Robert, who died in 1863, are believed to have saved nearly 200 enslaved people by giving them shelter and passage to freedom. Their courage cost them everything, their business, their home, their liberty, and ultimately, their lives. Mrs. Harrison is survived by her 3 sons, Thomas, James, and William of Philadelphia, and by the countless lives she changed forever. May her sacrifice never be forgotten. 200 people. Sarah leaned back, overwhelmed. For 3 years, in the most dangerous place imaginable, the Harrison family had run a rescue network that saved 200 human beings from slavery. She called Mrs. Patterson again and read the obituary aloud. The elderly woman cried openly. 200 people, she whispered. My family saved 200 people, and I never knew. My whole life, I never knew. Sarah returned to the trunk, searching for documents from Thomas, James, or William after the war. She found a group of letters written during the 1870s and 1880s, after the war and during Reconstruction. Thomas had become a textile merchant in Philadelphia, continuing his father's honest business. His letters revealed a man burdened by survivor's guilt. I often think of Father dying in prison while I lived free in the North. He saved my life by forcing us to flee. Yet I wonder if I should have stayed and been arrested with him. Mother told me before she died that Father's last thoughts were of us. He made her promise that we would understand our escape gave meaning to their sacrifice. 200 people freed, he said, and our sons alive to tell the story. I try to believe that is enough. James had become a teacher, dedicating his life to educating formerly enslaved people. A letter from 1873 described his work. I teach reading and writing to men and women who were kept deliberately uneducated under slavery. Some are elderly, their fingers stiff as they learn to hold a pen for the first time. Others are children whose parents were free too late to learn themselves. When they master a new word, I think of mother and father and all they gave up to break those chains. Education is how I continue their work. William had chosen a different path. He became a public speaker, traveling across the North and speaking openly about his family's Underground Railroad activities. Sarah found printed copy of several speeches he gave in the 1870s and 1880s. One speech delivered in Boston in 1875 described the photograph. I was 19 years old when we sat for that portrait. My father insisted our hands be placed in specific ways, signs that abolitionists would recognize. At the time, I thought it was simple boldness. Now I understand it was testimony. My father knew our work could cost us everything. He wanted proof that we existed, that we chose the right side of history. The photograph was his way of saying, we were here, we resisted, we did what was right even when it was dangerous. Another speech from 1882 went even further. People ask if my parents' sacrifice was worth it. They lost their freedom, spent their final years in prison and died for their beliefs. Was it worth it? I tell them to ask the 200 people my family helped to freedom. Ask their children and grandchildren who live free today. Ask the minister, the teacher, the families who built full lives because someone dared to help them escape slavery. Yes, it was worth it. 1,000 times, it was worth it. Sarah then discovered one final document that took her breath away. It was a ledger William had kept, trying to track every person his family had helped. It listed names, dates of passage through the Richmond station, and notes about their later lives when known. Some entries were brief. Martha, transported July 1859, believed to have reached Canada. Others were detailed. Samuel and wife Rose, transported December 1860 with 3 children. Samuel became a carpenter in Philadelphia. Children attended school. Family thriving. At the end of the ledger, William had written a summary of the roughly 200 souls my family helped. I have traced 73. All live in freedom. Many have families. Their children attend school, they own property, run businesses, and take part in civic life. This is my parents' true legacy, not their suffering, but the lives they saved and the freedom they made possible. Sarah spent 3 months preparing an exhibition about the Harrison family. The Virginia Museum of History dedicated an entire gallery to their story, with the 1860 photograph at its center. Around it she displayed Robert's journal, the coded letters, Catherine's final message to her sons, the prison records, William's speeches, and his ledger. The exhibition opened on a warm, humid Virginia evening. Sarah invited Mrs. Patterson and asked her to bring as many family members as she could. She had also spent weeks tracing the descendants of people the Harrison family had helped, following names from William's ledger and connecting them to living relatives through careful genealogical research. On opening night, the gallery filled with more than 100 people. Mrs. Patterson arrived with her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, 4 generations of Harrison descendants standing together. They gathered in front of the photograph, studying the faces of ancestors they had never known existed. But the most powerful moment for Sarah came when she introduced Mrs. Patterson to Marcus Johnson, an elderly black man from Philadelphia. Marcus held a worn photograph of his own, showing his great-great-grandfather, Samuel, the same Samuel listed in William's ledger. Your family saved my ancestor, Marcus said, his voice shaking. Samuel and Rose, and their 3 children, December 1860. They escaped from a plantation in Virginia, reached Richmond, and your family hid them in a warehouse. Then they were sent north, hidden inside fabric shipments." Mrs. Patterson took his hands, and both of them began to cry. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I lived my whole life without knowing what my family had done. Now you know," Marcus replied gently, "and now I can thank you. My great-great-grandfather became a carpenter. He built a life in freedom. He had 6 children. Those 6 had children of their own. Today, there are more than 60 people in my family tree. All of us are alive because your ancestors risked everything to help people they had never met." Sarah watched as more descendants met each other. Members of the Harrison family spoke with descendants of those their ancestors had saved. The gallery filled with tears, embraces, and shared stories as long missing pieces of family histories finally came together. During her opening speech, Sarah addressed the crowd. She explained that the photograph was taken in March 1860, 1 year before the Civil War began. 5 members of the Harrison family, Robert, Catherine, Thomas, James, and William, had posed for the portrait with their hands placed in coded positions. To most viewers, it looked like an ordinary family photograph. But to abolitionists who understood the signals, it was a message. Here is a safe house, here is shelter, here is a path north. She paused and looked at the large image behind her. What made the photograph truly remarkable was not only the codes, but what came next. 6 months after the photo was taken, Virginia left the Union. Richmond became the Confederate capital. The Harrison family could have stopped. They could have protected themselves. Instead, they continued their work in the most dangerous conditions possible, and they paid a terrible price. Sarah spoke of Robert's death in prison, of Catherine's years of forced labor, and of the sons fleeing north with the final group of people they were hiding. Then she said what mattered most. The Harrison family saved about 200 people from slavery. 200 human beings lived free because this family chose courage over safety. She gestured to the audience. In the room that night were Harrison descendants who had never known this history, and descendants of the people they saved who had never known who helped their ancestors. A photograph that had sat in archives for more than 150 years had finally brought them together. The exhibition ran for 6 months and became the most visited display in the museum's history. News stories spread across the country, and historians began searching for other photographs that might contain hidden codes from the Civil War era. Sarah received dozens of messages from people asking her to examine old family photos for similar signs. The most meaningful impact, however, was personal. Mrs. Patterson created a family history website, sharing everything Sarah had uncovered. Harrison descendants from across the country reached out, many stunned to learn the truth about their past. One distant cousin wrote, "I grew up in Virginia and was always told we had to leave because of a family scandal. I assumed we were Confederate supporters who had done something shameful. Learning that we left because we were abolitionists who were caught helping escaped slaves has completely changed how I see my family and myself." Marcus Johnson later organized a gathering for descendants of the people the Harrison family had helped. Sarah attended the event in Philadelphia, held in a church near where Thomas, James, and William had settled after fleeing Richmond. More than 200 people came, descendants of Samuel and Rose, of Martha who reached Canada, and of many others named in William's ledger. They shared stories passed down through generations. One woman said her great-great-grandmother had told her about a white family in Richmond who hid us in their warehouse and saved our lives. Another man brought a quilt his aunt, Esther, had made after gaining freedom. Its pattern resembled the fabric the Harrison family once imported, a quiet tribute to the people who helped her escape. Before the exhibition closed, Sarah stood in front of the photograph one last time. She had studied every detail for months, the painted backdrop, the formal clothing, the serious expressions. Now she saw something deeper. She saw 5 people making a deliberate choice to leave proof of their resistance. Robert and Catherine, knowing they might not survive, but determined to record their beliefs. Thomas, James, and William, young men who could have stayed silent and safe, but instead risked everything. The hand signals were not just secret codes. They were statements, quiet acts of defiance captured in silver and glass. preserved through time, waiting for someone to understand their meaning. Mrs. Patterson stood beside her. At 83 years old, she had spent 6 months learning everything she could about her ancestors. "I keep thinking about what Catherine wrote from prison," she said softly. "About ordinary people standing up to great evil, about lighting candles in the dark." "It's a powerful image," Sarah replied. "It's more than an image," Mrs. Patterson said. "It's a challenge." She was speaking to every generation after her, asking us what we will do when we face injustice. When doing the right thing is dangerous, will we stay silent or will we resist? Sarah looked again at the photograph, at the 5 serious faces and the carefully placed hands. "What do you think they would want us to remember?" Mrs. Patterson smiled through tears. "That we are capable of more courage than we think, that ordinary people, merchants, teachers, students, parents, can change history. Taking a stand costs something, sometimes everything. But staying silent costs even more." She gestured to the gallery around them. This photograph sat hidden for 150 years. Its story waited all that time. Now it's been told, and look what happened. Families reunited, history corrected, people reminded that resistance has always existed, even in the darkest places. Sarah nodded. She told Mrs. Patterson that her family story would appear in textbooks. Students would learn about the Harrison family, about underground railroad work inside Confederate territory, and about white allies who paid the highest price for their beliefs. "Good," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "We need those stories. We need to know that people have always fought injustice, even when it felt hopeless, especially when it felt hopeless." The photograph would be permanently displayed in the museum's Civil War gallery. Visitors would see Robert, Catherine, Thomas, James, and William Harrison frozen in their 1860 portrait, hands arranged in signals that once meant safety, shelter, and a path to freedom. But the image was no longer just a historical object. It had become a mirror, asking every viewer the same questions. What would you risk for your beliefs? What price would you pay to resist injustice? When doing the right thing is dangerous, what choice will you make? 5 people in a Richmond studio in 1860 had answered those questions with their hands, their lives, and their sacrifice. Their message, hidden in gesture and preserved in silver, had finally been understood, and it would continue speaking to future generations, a lasting reminder of the power of ordinary people who refuse to accept evil, no matter the cost.